This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern. Every week we bring you conversations with authors about the books and research and other things that we like. And if you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going to our homepage, that's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review, scroll down to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon, click and support us. Some of you have been doing this for months and years, and we cannot thank you enough. This episode is part of a series in partnership with the Israel office of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation that we like to call Israel Behind the Headlines, delving deep into and unpacking issues underlying our lives here in Israel. My guest today is a historian, a lecturer at the Hadassah Academic College in Jerusalem. The PhD dissertation that he completed at Tel Aviv University was recently published in Hebrew under the title Defending the Goal, Football and the Relations Between Jews and Arabs in Mandatory Palestine, 1917 to 1948. Dr. Omer Einav, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hello, Gilad. How are you?
I'm well, thank you for being with us. So, sports have become an increasingly popular topic for the study of cultural history, but why football in particular, rather than, physical culture or competitive sports in general during that period that interests you?
If we go straight to the core of the research.
That's why I'm getting the big bucks.
Yes. So football, basically, when we talk about the Mandate period, was the only common language between the two big communities or nationalities here in Palestine, Jews and Arab Palestinians. Think about their culture, music, theater, cinema, dancing, everything. The culture was absolutely different, almost no common language or topic of interest. And surprisingly, football became the most popular game here in Palestine among Jews and Arabs. There was a reason for that. And then, Great Britain, I think it's the answer. But so football, that was the first thing that I thought about as why the topic is interesting to me. Of course, I'm a football fan, and that's another reason. And football also is a place for fellowship and also for rivalry, and the complexity of it is also fascinating.
So when you're saying that it became the most popular activity in Palestine at the time, how did that play out?
So football basically immigrated to Palestine before Palestine became Palestine in the late Ottoman period. In the beginning of the 20th century, football came to Jerusalem and to Jaffa among, again, Arabs, mostly elite, academic, high schools of the Arab elite, and with the people of what we call the second Aliyah Shniya in Hebrew, in Jaffa, from Russian region, that brought football here. But First World War, 1914, just made this game collapse like other things here in this land. And the British occupied the country in 1917, brought the football here and made it more professional and organized. And actually they brought their culture to the natives like they did in other places in the empire.
So football was part of the broader culture of the imperial project that the British brought here to Palestine. Was it intentional, or was it just, because they liked playing football, so it just, tagged along in a way?
It was comfortable because, the modern football was born in England. So, and England was the power that ruled here in Palestine, so it was very easy to do. And I have a quote of Ronald Storrs, the governor of Jerusalem, which said that he gave footballs to the young Arabs that surrounding Jerusalem, that they will concentrate on sports and not become political. So they tried to use football as a tool to give the locals something to do that they won't make them trouble.
But how did it become, from this very recently introduced activity? As you say, it only started in the early 20th century, just, a few years before the First World War under the Ottomans, and then just a few years later became the most popular activity in Palestine. What were the organizational sort of mechanisms that made that process take place so remarkably?
That's a good question, because the British also, they tried to implement here cricket or rugby, not so successfully. But football, yes, was a big success. I think first of all, you think about institutions or organizations, but the basic thing that for football you need nothing. Basically, you need just 2 stones and socks, and you have ball and goal, and you can play. So that's a key for the public to love this game. But there was a big role to the Jewish sports organization Maccabi. It was established in Europe in the late 1890s. We talk about, we're not going to get into it, but Max Nodo and all his agenda and ideology. So Maccabi was
of the physical aspect of Zionism, etc.
Yeah, it was part of the Zionism and the new Jewish person, and how, it was an integral part of Zionism. So yes, Maccabi, they were well organized. Unfortunately, until today, they are well organized more than the club that I love, Hapoel. But yes, so it also they played a big role in this part, and that's the reason that it became a gap between the Jewish sports institutions and the Palestinians that were a little bit behind.
But were Maccabi focused on football in particular, even in Eastern Europe? Was it as big there as it was here with, the 2 arms of Zionism?
No, the first, they thought that gymnastics were much more important. Football, people thought of it as something, even, it had a bad image and something that wild youth do, and football was not recognized as a sport or something legitimate to do compared to gymnastics or swimming or things like that.
So when was the balance tipped then? When did it become like an acceptable?
When there was no choice because the public loved it, and they saw that they can make money of it. They can sell tickets. Football was not professional at the time, but they understood that the people like the game. They want to come to watch the game. They want to play the game. So you don't have other option but just make it institutionalized.
Yeah, this takes me on a side road for a second to ask you, how do you explain the great appeal of football as opposed to other sports? There's plenty of other sports, but football everywhere, not all around the world. And I'm asking this as someone who finds football eminently boring. That's why I'm asking almost like an external observer.
It's a very easy answer. We are now after a month of World Cup, and you just need to open the TV and see it yourself. Why it's so beautiful. And also, we don't. Of course, it's worth mentioning the problems specifically with this World Cup in Qatar and everything. But if we talk about the game, football, the secrets or the magic of the game, you see it. It's just beautiful. It connects people. It makes you see people in terms that you won't see them in other places. For example, you can see the Iranian people playing football, singing or not singing the national anthem. It's something that you cannot see in other places. Football is. Can
you not see it in the Olympic Games, for example? How is it like? How is the magic different?
The Olympic Games are not so emotional. It's a celebration of the human spirit and body and everything. And it's great and it's fantastic. But football, it's more dirty in a good way. That it's more human. It's and you can sympathize with it because every little child can see himself on the pitch because he finished to watch the game. He goes out and to his yard and kick the ball, and it's so daily.
So there's really, from how I understand your book, there's really 2 dimensions to that a blossoming of football in the early days of the mandate. One is, as you said earlier, the organizational infrastructure that the British brought, and I'm going to ask you to expand on it in a second. But also there's like this big cultural aspect to it. I mean, that people started loving it, started going to games, started perhaps playing it in their own spare time, reading about it in the newspapers, writing about it in the newspapers, became almost out of the blue this big cultural event.
Yes, it was, you can say step by step, it was not immediately, it took time. But I think one of the things that help it to blossom like this is the connection between football and the national struggle. Because you can see players that were also soldiers or police officers or anything like that. So there was the bond was really strong, and people saw it. Journalists, for example, they saw it as a national struggle. They described the game in the newspaper as a big fight between the Jewish and the Arab, and they like the Maccabees, the ancient Maccabees fighting on the pitch. They saw it as something that it belongs to the national arena.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm gonna go into that in a second, but first ask you really about the organizational aspect of that. I mean, as you said, it was part of the cultural project of imperialism. The British came here to sort of instill this activity in the natives alongside other activities, and so, as you said, there was this organizational infrastructure that allowed for that popularity that it was perhaps independent of it to really play out. What can you tell us really about? I mean, other than the fact that the governor of Jerusalem liked seeing young Arab boys playing football, how were the British and the British establishment here in Palestine invested in spreading football?
So I searched in my research for exactly to answer this question. And it was hard. I traveled to England to look, in the archives, and you don't find it in the top of the papers because, the national, the High Commissioner in Palestine didn't write to the Prime Minister about football. So you need to search in very original places, and I did find some nice things. The British established, for example, tournaments, the Palestine Cup. They founded the Jerusalem Sports Club, which is the first club in the holy city, Jerusalem, for people who worked in the government. They teach the locals what it means football culture. For example, that after the game you drink tea with the visitors, things like that. You play during the winter, not during the summer. There's a season for football, things like that. And the natives, as they thought of them as natives, they learn and they did it. For example, the Jewish also started their own league, and they founded the Palestine Football Association in 1928. That was part of FIFA since 1929. So that was part of the process that made the Palestinian, Jewish and Arab football more, still not professional, but more well organized.
One of the aspects of imperialism, and specifically British imperialism, and specifically in Palestine, is a sort of divide and rule, right? Taking opposing or perhaps adversarial populations within that territory and dividing them, turning them against each other. I mean, we won't go into that because it's a very long conversation. But I want to ask you with regards to a cultural activity or even a leisure activity like football. Did the British apply football differently to Jews and Arabs here? Did they? I mean, as part of it's it's a high culture in the way that they perceived it, right? I mean, it's a British sport, and the way the Jews were perceived as more European, more advanced, etc., as opposed to the Middle Easterners. Did this play out in football as well?
Actually, football was exactly like other dimensions, like political dimension, for example. The British really tried and wanted that Jews and Arabs will cooperate, and one with each other and with the British. And they had really good intentions. But like other things, very quickly they understood that it's not so easy. And you can see it really on the pitch that if they lost to a Jewish or Arab team, they started to kick the players and fight and being unsportive. And it was hard for the British to maybe to accept big gap between their intentions and the harsh reality in Palestine. And football was a great example exactly for this point. And one of the reasons that I wanted to write about this topic, because you can see through it lovely things about the reality here in Palestine.
Mm-hmm. So the British thought of football as not just a leisure activity or perhaps a depoliticizing activity, but also some form of dialogue between the Jews and the Arabs, and it was really with that intention in mind, and to bring both of them to the pitch so that they can do things together and everything will be hunky-dory.
I have a great example for that. In the big event of opening the Jerusalem Sports Club in March 1921, there was a game in the stadium in the border between German and Greek colony in Jerusalem. Winston Churchill was supposed to be there together with Herbert Samuel. They both didn't come because they were busy in establishing the Transjordan Emirate. But Ronald Stoll was there.
Had bigger fish to fry than football. Yeah.
Yes, it was a game between a military team and a civilian team. Military team, okay, they were British, all of them, but the civilian team, you would expect to see the people who live in this country. So among the 11, the chosen 11, there were one Jewish man, one Palestinian, and 9 British.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, it was in the beginning, 1921, but that I could finish my book with this story because you can see they really wanted, but they didn't know how to do it.
Right. And was football, I mean, we talked about the way the British perceived football vis-a-vis the two communities, but also did the two communities perceive football differently as something that is British and therefore should be, looked on more favorably or less favorably?
I don't think that they perceive the game as a British thing. They learned from the British. For example, until 1930, there were only British referees. So they learned from the British. They perceive them as experts. But most of the Jewish played football, they were from Germany or Poland or Russia or Austria. So the influence was more Central European. And teams who came to Palestine to play against the local team were from Eastern Europe and Central Europe. Even, I think, not one British club played in Palestine. Of course, military teams and police, but real British club didn't come to Palestine once.
Right. No, but the way did the two communities, the Jews and the Arabs, see the actual game or perhaps the league? I mean, also the institutional aspects of it differently. Not just from a national perspective, but also what it does, like the place that it occupies in people's lives.
They understood really in the Zionist case really quickly, and the Palestinian case more slowly. The part of football as a tool, a national tool, to gain popularity. You go to the game and you sing the national anthem, you see the flag, you see the jersey with with the symbol of your nationality. That's a tool, and mayors and important people understood it and use it. Until today, we see it. We see politicians come to the game and during campaigns. So it's not something new. Palestinians and Jewish understood it really well during the mandate period. It was different from today because football was not professional and the football players were not professional, so they did other things, which is quite maybe funny, but also interesting.
Yeah. But also the fact that they were sort of, made to play each other at some point. I mean, it's a good litmus test for. I mean, always quite often your identity is measured against the identity of the other, and when it was so regular and part of the day to day, it gave lots of opportunities for that to happen.
Yes, but the problem is that the relations were not so stable, and it changed during the mandate period. For example, surrounding the 1929 riots or 1936, 1939. Something that could be maybe surprising is that the honeymoon of the Jewish-Arab relations in football and generally during the mandate period was during World War II. That was just a fantastic period here in Palestine for the relations because there was a bigger thing. There was something more important that happened in Europe. So, the conflict didn't take a big part during that time, relatively to others.
How do you, what makes you say that there was a honeymoon? What makes it the honeymoon period?
It was one of the only times that Palestinian clubs were part of the Zionist Association.
Right.
They played because there was many reasons for that. For example, that there was no Palestinian Association after the Arab Revolt because the institutions in the Palestinian society just collapsed after the brutal actions by the British. So they had no option, and they just were part. They accepted as clubs in the Zionist in the Palestine Football Association, which was Zionist and British. So it didn't lasted so long.
Wait, so before then there was a separate Arab association?
Okay, so yeah, I didn't explain from the beginning. 1928, the Palestine Football Association were established. It was Jewish and British, but Yosef Yekutieli, which was the founder of the association, he knew that, his goal was to be accepted to FIFA. And to be accepted to FIFA was optional in one term, that you represent all the people in your country, in Palestine in this case. So we invited one Palestinian representative to the first meeting. He sat there, he signed on the paper, he didn't say a word. It was the first time and the last time he came, and that's enough. It was just enough. The Palestinians, of course, were not happy, and 3 years later, or 4 years actually, 1932, a Palestinian Sport Federation established in Jaffa. It operated okay until it collapsed.
Wait, that was an Arab association?
That was Arab-Palestinian. Separate from the Palestine Football Association. It was the Palestinian Sports Federation.
Right.
Which is the Palestinian Arab one. It collapsed in the revolt, Arab revolt in 1930. Actually, it lasted until 1938, which was nice. And it was reestablished in 1944.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were two. Actually, they tried also to be part of FIFA. It was a big affair in 1946. They didn't succeed in that. The Israeli or the Zionist lobby made him not succeed in that. Yeah,
because the British Zionist Association had already been accepted to FIFA, and they said, okay, there's just one for Palestine.
Yeah, FIFA said we cannot accept two different associations in one entity, which was they didn't have problem that it was not a state, it was mandate Palestine, but they said you must decide. You can be represented just by one association.
Yeah. Well, the thing about, if we consider the history of the mandate period, 30 years, so you can actually divide it quite clearly to, the first years that were relatively peaceful, and then starting with the 1929 riots, it started this, slow but steady collapse with a few bumps on the road, like the Second World War that you mentioned, but football, as you say, was meant to bring something else, right? Something that is not just a reflection of the day-to-day Jewish-Arab relations in the rest of the country, and offer some sort of like a preserve of something, perhaps something else. Did it ever live up to that hope, or was it just like anything else in Palestine at the time? Just, when things were okay between Jews and Arabs, football was okay, and when things were shit between Jews and Arabs, football was shit.
Both.
Mm-hmm.
That's the beautiful thing till today, by the way. Because football, on the one hand, is very political, as I mentioned earlier. It's political, it's a political tool, it presents, nationalities and religions and everything, so you cannot separate them. But on the other hand, there is, a peaceful dimension, a separate dimension that you can preserve through this game. For example, we look at today, for example, United States played against Iran a few weeks ago in the World Cup. You cannot see it in other places where you can see such a scenario just on a football pitch. So exactly like that, 90 or 80 years ago here in Palestine, Jewish and Arab did find the way to play. There were times that they didn't manage to do it because of the national conflict. But if I give you one example, and it also relates to the British, they were linked to the workplaces, from government ministries and police and the post office. And there, Jewish and Arab played together. Why? Because these workplaces, they paid the players to work. They practically did nothing, but they played for their team. And it was quite prestige league. And they forced Jewish and Arab to cooperate on the game because it was, they get their salary from it, and then they didn't have any choice.
And did they?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
It happened. You can see, for example, one right-wing Jewish man from the Irgun, a revisionist, that worked in some English British bank together with Palestinian nationalists. They could not meet on the game on the pitch because there was big rift this period. But they worked together and had to play together in the workplace. So yes, it happens.
And what about the British that had these wonderful intentions? In general, had the wonderful intentions in the beginning and later dropped them. Did it apply to football as well? Did they at some point say, "Okay, well, it's not working the way we wanted it to work"?
Yes, not surprisingly, it happened in football. For example, after the riots in 1929. And there was the White Book of Passfield a few months later, 1930. It was a big Zionist protest against the British policy. And there were some big mess in games between British police and a Jewish team. And after some British player said to a player of Hapoel Haifa, "Bloody Jew," and he answered by a punch to the face. So the High Commissioner, John Chancellor, said, "No more. The British team will not play anymore against civilian teams," which it means Arab and Jewish team, but practically it meant Jewish teams. And actually it was a ban for 1 or 2 years. And it happened. The British, in some point, they understand they don't have the power to force things on the locals. And they just gave up. And, they prefer to play against themselves, police, military service. I mean, they just had their leagues and cups, and yes.
Mm-hmm.
They continue to play against Jewish and Arabs, but when it was comfortable to them.
Right. Do you know anything about the way it was after the establishment of Israel? I mean, did some of these trends, quite often, the current situation in the state of Israel, or maybe the situation in the early state of Israel, is a continuation of trends that started under the British mandate. Does it apply to football as well?
Yes and no. Yes, the Palestine Football Association became the Israeli Football Association and the Israeli national team, and the league just continued more or less the same. But the Palestinian football just stopped. In 1948, like other things, the Palestinian Sports Federation, the last evidence I find to her being was in the beginning of December 1947, the beginning of the war, of the 1948 war. After that, there was no federation. After 1948, in Israel, so there were Arab clubs that were starting to be established in the 1950s under the Jewish centers, Hapoel, Maccabi, Beitar, in the Jewish villages and the cities.
So there weren't a continuation of the the Arab associations of the Mandate?
No.
In any way?
No, the Palestinian Association was reestablished in the middle of the 1990s. But after there was Palestinian Authority, after the Oslo Agreement, so yes.
Yeah, well, okay. All right, Dr. Omer Einav, historian, author of the new book, Defending the Goal, Football and the Relations Between Jews and Arabs in Mandatory Palestine, 1917 to 1948. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And also big thanks to Itai Shelem, the manager of TLV1 Studios. And now we've got a request, because many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app. And we would like to ask you to please write a review for us. Good, bad, ugly, up to you. You too can support us by going to our website and subscribing onto a Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. It has something like 800 interviews to keep you interested and hopefully annoyed. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and most important, join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, from me here in Tel Aviv, goodbye.